on the News Channel 5 network. This is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. It's nice to have you with us on this Thursday. And it's going to be an interesting topic conversation this morning. I know many of you pay attention to politics, especially at the national level, and certainly there's been a lot going on. We've been paying attention recently because of several stories locally with what's happening in politics and the legislature here. But we're going to shift gears a bit and look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. and, everything from the latest with Donald Trump, with China, with the Mueller report, with whether or not our Attorney General is held in contempt of Congress. All of that, and we'll take your thoughts as well as maybe how this all shapes up with the pending political races. And it's not going to be that long until, that next presidential race is really fired up. Some would say it already has. So we'll get the number up on the screen. There it is, 737-7587. Your thoughts and comments as we touch on all these different topics with our guest, the professor from Vanderbilt. He is a fine man, a friend of mine, and always someone willing to come on and join us early in the morning like this. Thomas Schwartz, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Nice to have you on.
Nice to be here.
I first sat down when I saw him this morning, sometimes the guest gets here before me, and then I come in from the newsroom. I said, well, what do you want to talk about? Much going on. And as always, he's been following the news of the past several weeks. And where do you start? What, when we look at Washington, D.C., some of the big headlines coming out and maybe what people are following closely and maybe what's most titillating. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's certainly, the Attorney General Barr and being held in contempt of Congress and whether or not the White House will protect him with, executive privilege. You want to start there?
Well, we could. I mean, there's a lot of theater going on now in terms of the conflict between the president and Congress. The Mueller report, at least in its basic argument, did not find that the president had committed criminal acts of collusion with Russia. And so the fact that it didn't find the maximum complaint led the president to declare vindication. It did, however, include lots of rather embarrassing other types of detail about how the president had behaved, his attempt to get Mueller fired, things like that provided the basis for an argument that he might have been trying to obstruct justice during that time. And so and Mueller didn't come up with a vindication on that. So that's given the Democrats some fuel to want to investigate further and to want to see the entire report.
Meaning, when you say entire report, and we hear that the report's out there, meaning entire unredacted report. And let's be clear why so much of it is redacted. I mean, I don't know, when things are redacted, national security, there's maybe grand jury testimony in there that should be kept private, as most grand jury discussions should be. Is it that big a deal that much is redacted?
I suspect it's not as big a deal as it's being made out. Nevertheless, there may be something in there that they could use. There may be embarrassing information on the president's contacts, whatever. But the Attorney General does have an argument that he can't release material that's illegal for him to release, grand jury material and the rest. This is one of those fights that I think might be over a rather small issue. I think the Congress is searching for wanting to project, or at least to investigate, some of the things the president did, and so they'd like the full report. But I somehow doubt. One of the things people forget is that Attorney General Eric Holder was also held in contempt by the Congress over documents, and that's only recently been resolved. So these things could take forever, and certainly
long after maybe the president's even gone.
Long after the president's gone, long after the 2020 election, which will really be the key.
Okay, and we talked about that, and I don't know what your thoughts are on how this affects the race as it moves on. 2020, it's not that far away.
Right.
And you see, the House continues to discuss, maybe in the wake of the report, the option of maybe impeachment and things like this. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, I think, has said time and again, we don't think that's a good move. We all know that even if they were to pass it in the House, he's not going anywhere. He's not going to be impeached. The Senate's not going to approve that, right?
Right.
What would the point be?
I think the point would be maybe to lay down a marker to say we do not think that his behavior has risen or has been presidential, and in fact we think it even qualifies under the high crimes and misdemeanors. I mean, it would be a dramatic way of stating disapproval of the president before the election. Honestly, you're right, though. There's nothing that given the makeup of the Senate, given the president's popular support, there's nothing that's going to really cause or bring about conviction. So this would be a more symbolic statement of defiance against the president and what is seen to be his violation of the norms of political behavior and presidential behavior.
Did you see where his son was called now to have to testify? And that was by Republicans, correct?
The Republican Senate Judicial Committee that is investigating the question of Russian interference in the elections.
Yeah, and whether or not the president had some business dealings and things like this that might have tied into that.
And also the famous Donald Trump Jr. meeting with Russians, in which he was looking for dirt on Hillary Clinton.
But this is the Senate, and then these are Republicans calling. What is the significance of that? I mean, so much of the investigations, one way or the other, are partisans. It's the Democrats now that they're in control of the House, and some people are going to say, well, it's just partisan attack. And there's probably some truth to that. I think some of the questions they're asking are completely legitimate. On the other hand, you have Republicans that tend maybe not to do as much and support and not do as much, and yet you have a Republican committee here in the Senate actually calling his own son to have to testify.
Right. No, and I think in that sense it's a more serious issue. Now, Donald Trump Jr. could, of course, simply refuse to come and be held in contempt. I'm not sure that they'd want to do that, want to push this issue all the way. What I understand is that they had been having negotiations trying to get him to appear voluntarily, and those broke down, and so they ended up issuing this subpoena. But it will be interesting to see if he decides to appear or if they can work out some sort of an arrangement for his testimony.
Let's get back to the Mueller report. Redacted, all of this. We know that there was that letter written to Attorney General Barr from Mueller based on what Barr originally sent out. And I don't know how you take the letter. I'll ask you that, because some thought maybe, Mueller was saying you've mischaracterized to some degree what our findings were. And what's your take on that? And that will lead me to my next question.
Well, I mean, my take is that Attorney General Mueller wanted to put absolutely the best appearance on it for the president, so he focused on those things.
No, you mean Barr.
Attorney General Barr wanted to put the best appearance on it, and he wanted, in a way, he knew he had the opportunity, in a sense, to control the news cycle, to basically get out the story that there was no collusion and no determination on obstruction, and he did it. Now, whether it does not seem as though, I mean, it seems like he skirted close enough to he may have skirted close to the falsehoods, but there were no falsehoods, and it was selective use of the issue. It was selective reading of the Mueller report, and that some of the people in the Mueller report really felt he was not mischaracterizing their results, and so they sent what he referred to as the snippy letter, or snarky, snippy, I forget what
letter.
The letter the Barr called it.
So Barr's opinion, and he claims to have a good relationship with Mueller, is that it was probably written by one of Mueller's staffers, but I guarantee you Mueller looked it over before it was sent. But all right, so that's what's interesting to me, and there's no doubt, I think it shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone what Barr ended up doing one way or the other, because he was put there by the president, and you had to figure there was going to be some filter, as you said, from him to make it look as good as he could for the president. Now, if anyone through all this, and the president has even praised Mueller now in the wake of this, has credibility on both sides, should be Mueller. So what he says, one way or the other, can be huge. And the idea now is that he's going to be called to testify, right?
Right.
How
the president has said
that
he doesn't want him to testify, but I mean, Mueller can testify.
He can do it. No, the president can't stop him.
No.
Mueller can do whatever he wants.
Right.
Now, if you call, what do you suspect? How's that shaping up? I guess I haven't heard of late. I mean, he'll be called, and how significant is that for him to be called to testify, which he has to expect they were going to call him?
Yeah, no, I think it would be, it'll make for a rather dramatic media moment, but Mueller is not a drama person.
No, he didn't seek it at all. That's one reason he has so much credibility, in my opinion.
Right.
He never did. He laid it out. Short of that little letter he sent from his office to Barr, He doesn't do that, does he?
He doesn't do it. So it would be a really significant moment. How he'd testify would be very interesting. He may, in a very sober way, make it clear that they were very unhappy with the president. They were very unhappy with his behavior. But on the other hand, I don't think his testimony will be decisive. Certainly, I don't think it's likely to lead to any groundswell for impeachment. But you know, these days it's hard to say. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, who you mentioned, also said she thought that the president's behavior now of trying to get Mueller not to testify, of invoking executive privilege, made him almost impeachable. She was saying that. So she's obviously feeling pressure from her base in the House to be tougher and maybe even to contemplate impeachment hearings.
Interesting. All of this against the backdrop, as you said, of 2020 and how this shapes up and what it will mean one way or the other. And yeah, we'll take a break. When we come back, we want to talk maybe more about, as we're going in that direction, some of the things we've learned, as well as, you know, some of the candidates, including Joe Biden now in the mix now, and what that means for the Democrats anyway. And we can take some calls too. If there's elements of this that you followed that you have a question or comment on, 737-7587. If you're on hold, stay there. We'll get to your calls with our guest, Professor Schwartz, right after this.